About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
I've improved by a whole grade.
I've improved
by a whole grade.
by a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
My teacher isn't just Mr. Maddock. It's a whole teaching team made up of James, Mike and Marta.
My classroom's all about doing and applying. My days standing at the front of the classroom with a PowerPoint are long gone.
I master every concept by learning at my own pace.
I spend 100% of my class time interacting and supporting individual students.
I move on only when the moment is right for me, not the whole class.
I know what each and every student is mastering and struggling on at every moment.
I know exactly what I need to learn next, and I can go back and review material at any time.
I spend my teaching time supporting and inspiring, not planning, delivering and marking.
I can learn from anywhere at any time.
I can switch off when school closes, knowing they are learning from the best.
My teacher has my homework marked before I get to class.
I set every piece of homework at the start of the year.
I'm 2 weeks ahead of my expected progress.
I can track everyone's progress with a swipe of a finger.
I can track my own progress and set my own targets.
I now have time to focus on developing the skills of every learner in my classroom.
I know exactly what it means to explain, evaluate and analyse, and I'm not afraid of any exam.
My lessons are now far more about the skills and the application, not just the content itself.
I've completely remodeled what it means to be a teacher in my classroom.
Good afternoon, good evening, one and all. It is a scorcher out there. So if you are tuning in for your A-Level P revision, fair play to you, top effort, because it's a warm one out there, and we really do appreciate people doing that. So we're here. We are in what I can only describe, Marta, as an absolute sweat box of an office because of for sound quality. We have to close everything. We've got no air conditioning. It is unreal, and you want to be very, very thankful that this is not some kind of smell-o-vision event, because
Perspiration Republic.
As my younger daughter would describe it, this is ranking in air. So yes. But did you call it perspiration? What?
What? Perspiration Republic.
You can't do that to me at the start of a stream. How am I going to recover? Perspiration Republic. I'm just gonna get a T-shirt.
You're a PE teacher here. You're supposed to know these words.
I have another word. I mean, It's not a problem with the word. It's just made me laugh. Anyway, so we're going to get straight onto it because this is probably our most content-heavy session we're going to do in the entire series. So I would predict this is going to be the bit where I'm kind of teaching most. Okay, so be ready for that on the warmest day. There you go. So very quick reminders. Reminder number 1, I cannot stress this enough, folks. Please support our work by subscribing to the YouTube channel. Look, it's a small act for you, but actually the impact of that is very, very significant for us. I'll just give something away here, for example. We really need to get to 1,000 subscribers to unlock things that we want to provide to you for free. So it's really important that you do that to get us up to that number and things. So please do consider that, and switch notifications on as well. Secondly, throughout the course of the show, there are going to be sort of slight sound adjustments because I'm going from this microphone to this one's not on at the moment, but this microphone here. So you may need to adjust at times just to get your volumes right. So do be prepared to do that. It's obviously very easy. Thirdly, we are going to ask you to interact with the show. I think you're probably getting the feel of that already if you've taken part in any of the shows so far. So #revision break is one methodology. So did I go to the wrong one or did they, Marta? #revision break is one of the things we would really like to get your photos in. Share with us, whether you're a student or a teacher, what it is you're doing on those little breaks. And we've got some pretty cool music to go with that revision break today, Marta. We're wondering if it's going to become #revision break dancing today. It's really
possibly, although with this heat, I'm not sure anyone's going to be dancing around.
No, that's true. And finally, we've also got the interactive questions that you can take part in. So I think Marta's going to show those to you as well. And Marta, do you want to describe this as you show on the screen?
Yes, so you need to go to theeverlearner.com. You need to click on news. On here, we've got this beautiful post here which says interactive questions. Click on here, and then down here, you've got all the interactive questions. Just look for the one you are doing today.
Number three.
Marta,
come
cardiovascular
on,
system.
stick with us.
Sorry, I knew it was cardiac or something
there was
about
two
cardio. Exactly, I got a bit confused. And
worryingly,
I was thinking,
one of them you were involved with yesterday.
No, I know, but sorry. So cardiovascular system. Click on here, and then here you've got the interactive question.
And
once you're ready, submit.
We're just about to start publishing some of the examples that we've been receiving. Gotten some crackers actually, so we are going to be publishing those imminently. So be prepared to look out for those on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. They're on their way. We just want to make sure that we are publishing the best ones that come in. So the more that you can submit to us, the more choices that we have. So all that understood, I think, hopefully, Marta, we should be ready. I did forget one thing, of course, Marta. I didn't introduce you. Marta, who's over here. Marta's already shattered because she's literally just finished doing an hour of Spanish teaching.
I don't need any introductions.
No. You're on fire today, Marta. Don't need any. But Marta's literally just finished doing an hour's teaching of Spanish in this same format for the GCSE students. So let's see if she can keep her energy levels high before the end of the day. Okay, I'm gonna switch my microphone. If you just give me a few moments, Marta, I will be ready.
Yep. Okay. Ready, James? Okay.
Okay, we are ready. Let's make let's make a good start on this one. For me, this topic is a really important one for a couple of reasons. We might get what we might refer to, and we'll show you some of these in a moment, bespoke questions about this particular topic. But the other thing for me is that this content and this understanding, it filters through to a large amount of other understanding. A great example of that would be something like recovery processes or energy systems or VO2 max, for example. So we've got to realize that we are also preparing ourselves to answer in other topic areas when we get a fundamental grasp of these concepts. So I'm kind of aiming to do both things. What we're going to do is, in terms of example answers, is look at this kind of bespoke thing where we literally get asked about cardiovascular values, but that knowledge can, of course, underpin a whole range of information and understanding in a range of other stuff. All right, first things first. We have this base equation here, and of course we're looking at our performer here, our triathlete, and what we're going to say here is that we have a situation where cardiac output, which I'd encourage you to remember that can be called Q dot, cardiac output equals, I don't know if my yellow is going to work on here, let's give it a go, SV stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. And I don't think anyone's going to be too shocked at that statement. Maybe this Q dot is going to be something that's new to you. Q is the symbol for cardiac output, and the dot means per minute, actually literally per unit of time, but in our context, per minute. So let's go through what each of these things. So here, of course, with heart rate, we are talking about heart contractions per minute. Okay, heart contractions per minute. That's our, very simple sort of definition of the frequency of heart contractions. Our stroke volume, of course, we have got blood. I'm going to go for a very shorthand version of the. Doesn't that yellow look different? It's the same yellow on white and black. That's interesting. Blood ejected from. I'm going to just put LV, left ventricle, per contraction. Okay, so we've got a situation here where stroke volume, which we know is the quantity of blood ejected from the left ventricle per contraction. If we multiply that by the number of times the heart beats per minute, we should already be able to define what cardiac output does. I'm almost tempted to pause for a moment and ask you to write your own definition in here, because you should be able to define it from the basis of what I've just put on the screen with no other information if you'd never studied this before, because we've got this equal sign. This side has to be equal to this side. So to make that the case, of course, we're going to have here a quantity of blood leaving the left ventricle per minute. And really where I want to go with this is just to put some numbers in, okay, just to make sure that we can understand that. Now, I've mentioned left ventricle a couple of times here. You might find your example accepts leaving the heart, but I think you should be saying leaving the left ventricle. We are talking about the blood passing through the systemic circuit, so specifically leaving that left ventricle via the aorta, the aortic arch, and then into the network of arteries and arterioles leading to the capillaries. So that's why we want to be specific with that. Now, in terms of numbers, we find, let's do this. So we're going to say at rest here. So this is going to be our resting value. We find that cardiac output tends to be in the region, on average, of 5 litres. Okay, so we've got 5 litres, and that's got to equal something. And of course, we've got blood ejected from the left ventricle per contraction, and we tend to find that this is in the region of about, why did I do a pound sign? Of about 70 millilitres. Okay, approximately 70 millilitres of blood leaves yours and my left ventricle per contraction as we sit doing kind of things we do now. I guess my heart's going a little bit harder, and I've maybe got a bit more sort of venous return coming back to my heart, because I'm kind of a little bit tense doing this, but nevertheless that's the approximate level, and we're going to multiply that by a number to get 5. Now you can calculate that exactly if you want. I'm going to estimate it, and we're going to say that our heart rate therefore is going to be in the region of 72 beats per minute. Now, before we get to sort of analyze that in more detail, notice the consistency of those. What do you notice that's consistent about that number, and that number? What is consistent? The numbers are different, but what's the same? I've included the units. For goodness sake, when you are writing in any mathematical way, please make a point of including your units in your answer. Sometimes the exam would kind of give you the unit, and maybe it's not as relevant, but you should be in the practice of doing that. Now, What we find, therefore, is if we get 72, we multiply it by 70, we get just shy of 5 litres. So that's going to give you an impression of this cardiac output concept. So we've got 5 litres of blood going at rest around the systemic circuit. Now, I'm going to get into this a little bit later. Just be aware that only 15% of that, and from memory, I think that's about 750 millilitres, 15% of that is going to the muscle at rest. Okay, and therefore we've got 85% going to other organs. I'm not going to really get into that in any detail in this little bit because we're not going to touch on it a lot. We've got a little bit in a question later, but just be aware, obviously, we could talk about vascular shunting and redistribution at that point. Now, what I do think is interesting is let's just look at exercise conditions a second. Exercise. Okay, exercise. Now, I'm going to kind of do this in reverse here. Exercise. So if we assume, there's our equals, there's our multiply. Let's assume, for example, let's take it like this. We've got a situation where our stroke volume can increase up to something in the region of 140 milliliters. So we can basically double. Now, I'd encourage you to think, if we follow the principle of the all or none law, how can it be that the heart ejects more blood per contraction than at rest? Because remember, at rest, your heart is still going at full power. So you might want to reflect on how is it that we get more blood out, and I'll come back to that point in a few moments' time. But let's say we've got an athlete who is 20 years old, and they're going to have a maximum heart rate something like 200 beats per minute. Remember that 220 minus age thing? Well, if we multiply these things together, we have our cardiac output going up to something in the region of 28 litres. Now, that would be a very, very good quality cardiac output for a decent quality athlete. Okay, so just be aware of that there have been cases where cardiac output can go up even as high as 35 to 40 litres, but that's extravagant kind of levels of fitness, you understand? But the point is, we get this significant increase in both stroke volume and, of course, in heart rate range. Now, bear in mind that this here is what we'd call a heart rate range. If we've got resting heart rate at 72 and we've got maximum heart rate at 200, of course, that means we've got a heart rate range of 128. Anyone who's looked at Carvone principle will know that's a particularly important number. We've also got here a stroke volume range, so we could call that an SV range. In this case, it's of 70 milliliters. And we've also got here a cardiac output range. Okay, and in this case, it would be of 23 litres, right? Now, one thing I'd like you to realise is that if we were to take cardiac output for a really highly trained athlete, their resting value would remain at 5 litres. But their max value would go up to whatever, to 30 for argument's sake. So as a result, their range would be bigger as well. It would go to 25 litres. So resting cardiac output remains constant, generally speaking. Of course, we've got a different case with heart rate. Heart rate actually does decrease in a resting format if we are highly trained. And generally, we have that figure of 60 to 80 BPM, which is a classic average. You and I are probably between 60 and 8, give or take, depends on who we are. I'm definitely not near 60, I know that, and probably may well be over 80 these days, but 60 to 80 beats per minute. But of course, if we get someone who is below 60 beats per minute, then we can refer to that as someone who is bradycardic. That's one word, by the way, bradycardic, or is experiencing bradycardia, so lower than average resting cardiac rhythm or frequency, which is below 60 beats per minute. So that's a nice term for you to grasp hold of. Now, I'm not going to look specifically at curves for cardiac output and stroke volume, but we have those on the EverLearner.com. Go and have a study of those. We have an awful lot of information on this. You might find it beneficial. What I do want... let me address a point before I do this. Let me address a point that I sort of posed to you. Why or how can it be that stroke volume, considering that the heart contracts fully every time it contracts, including at rest, how can the heart expel or eject more than 70 milliliters in exercise conditions? And it's because, of course, if I just draw a rather dodgy heart, whenever I draw hearts, it was looking like bums somehow. But of course, what happens with this heart is we're talking about the quantity of blood that's leaving the heart. Okay, so the quantity of blood is leaving the heart is question mark, and we had at rest it's 70 millilitres. But of course, we're not yet considering the amount of blood which is returning to the heart, what we'd call venous return. If this venous return goes up in quantity, of course, more blood is going to leave the heart. Moreover, the heart is going to kind of swell. It's going to kind of swell more. It's going to kind of like swell outwards more because it's fuller. Okay, I'm doing this really badly. It's going to swell outwards more because it's fuller. So think about any kind of elasticated property, including a muscle. If you stretch it further, how does it ping back? It pings back with more force. So it also pings back with more force because it's fuller, and therefore we can get more blood out of the heart. And that's, by the way, I wasn't going to get into this, but that's called an ejection fraction if we actually calculate that. If we're able to get more of the blood out of the heart, in other words, we decrease the end systolic volume, we call that an ejection fraction. That in many ways is going a little bit further than I wanted to go today, but nevertheless, you can start to see where we're starting to go down the rabbit hole of understanding here. It goes a lot deeper, and we're looking at the fundamentals for the time being. Now, I also want to get onto this graphical representation. What do we have here? It is simply a graphical representation of heart rate. Note this term, submaximal. In my mind, submaximal can mean all kinds of things, but I tend to think in the sports science kind of arena, I tend to think about it just for practical terms. You can think about it any way you want, but I think about it as like a 30-minute training run. Now, if you're a cyclist or a swimmer, feel free to switch run for swim or whatever, but I tend to think about it in that way because it gives us a nice impression of what a curve might look like in the classic format within this environment. But be clear, a submaximal performance is not a sprint. It is not interval training. It is not a multi-stage fitness test. It is something which is consistent, and the term I would like to use, steady state, more of which in a second. Now, let's go over this curve because we're going to answer a question on it in a second. Notice, first of all, position A here. This is RHR. What is that, folks? RHR. I'm sure you can tell me that is resting heart rate. Where is it? Notice it's at 80 beats per minute. So this is someone who's at kind of the upper end of the normal range. Maybe someone like me who doesn't exercise enough, has had a history of fitness and being fit, but at the moment it's kind of like, not so kind of, I've just gone through a process of judging myself there. But you get the idea. This could be someone who's at that upper end of normal resting heart rate range. Now, we have something interesting at B. What is it? We call this the anticipatory rise. Okay, let's be clear about this. This little dot here, we're getting an increase in heart rate. Usually it's a bit more significant than this increase actually, but this is as a result of the release of adrenaline. Okay, so the adrenal glands release some adrenaline, and that adrenaline acts specifically on the SA node of the heart and stimulates an increase in heart rate. So before we start exercising, look, there's exercise starting there. Before we start exercising, adrenaline stimulates an increase in heart rate through that process. You probably feel it sometimes as well. It's like the feeling of activation or excitation. You know, it happens in numerous aspects of life, but it happens pre-exercise as well. Now, of course, we said here we've got exercise commencing. So therefore, we've got this point here. And it's really important we get this right. We are going to describe this as a steep rise. Can I emphasize the need for you to use the word steep? This is not a gradual rise. This is not a kind of a lackadaisical rise. No, it's a steep rise in heart rate. Look, this is almost vertical. Okay, so what's happening in this process? Well, we're starting to run at this point. Remember, we're going to run consistently. It's steady state. So, whatever pace let's say I'm running 8-minute mile pace, which I very proudly tell you I once did a marathon at that pace. I'm nowhere near that level right now, but I kind of one of my achievements in life. Never mind, only one, having said that, nearly killed me. Anyway, so this steady state is that they're running at that point from the start. Now, we also want to note here that, of course, we've got an area of our curve there, which appears to have kind of been missed out. And I'm not going to get into too much detail on that, but that's what we'd call your oxygen deficit. Okay, so we'll look at that when we do the stuff on recovery in more detail, but just know for now that's called oxygen deficit. But we get this steep rising heart rate, and this work in this green area is done anaerobically. Everything under the curve is aerobically generated. Everything above the curve, if it's missed, is anaerobically generated. Now, so we get the steep rise, then we get to point D. This is what we call a steady state. Okay, and let me be specific what steady state means. It means oxygen supply meets oxygen demand. Let me write it over here. O2 supply equals O2 demand. Okay, so that is what I mean by steady state. Exercise ends at this point here, right here. So we get a fall in heart rate. And I want to label these correctly. So point E here, we want to call that a steep fall, or often we call it a steep decline. You guys probably already be able to tell me that's the fast component of epoch. Yes, you're right, it is. But just for the purpose of this, we're going to call it a steep decline. And then finally, here we have a leveling off, or a gradually leveling off. Try and use that language, please, and understand that in that steep decline we are undertaking certain physiological processes. You guys probably already know that in the steep decline, in the fast component of epoch, we are resaturating myoglobin, we are resynthesizing ATP, we are recoupling or resynthesizing phosphocreatine. You guys probably know that already. We're not going to get into too much detail on that. And in area F, or by point F, we're removing lactic acid, and the fate of lactic acid has those 4 possibilities, more of which in other sessions. But the point is that we have this classic shape and we can interpret that graph. And you guys out there need to be able to talk in the detail and the rhythm and the certainty that I've just described. I haven't written everything down that's possible on the page there, much of which we're going to get to in future sessions. But in terms of interpretation of that graph, you should be able to do that, at least by the time you go and sit in that exam. Question. Well, what do we have here? Excuse me. This graph shows Kate. By the way, I should have said earlier, I actually forgot her name, if I'm being honest. This is Kate. I was like, I know this person, but I've forgotten her name. Kate is one of our athlete profiles. She's a really good triathlete, and she's managed to reach the GB squad. She's an aerobic athlete, of course. Now, now we've got a question here. This graph shows Kate's heart rate responses over a sprint triathlon event. So this is one of the shorter triathlon events. Analyze the graph, making specific reference to heart rate responses and the intensity of exercise at different stages. Okay, first thing, we should have a comma there. Okay, bad grammar kind of frustrates me a little bit, especially if I've written it. There should be a comma there, never mind. So first of all, I want to address the concept of analysing. This comes with a little bit of a health warning. Okay, and what I'm going to say here, I urge you, especially if you're watching this as an individual student on demand, or you're watching it at home or something, I urge you to consult with your teacher on this about your specific exam board requirement for the word analyze, because unfortunately different exam boards do use that word in different ways. What I'm going to tell you analyze means is the correct structure, because analyze and evaluate are not the same thing, as you're going to see as we go through these sessions. But for me, analyze is actually a very, very simple process. What it means is that you break something up and explain it. That is what analysing is. Okay, so if we look at our graph, for example, how would we break that graph up into parts? Well, we've kind of been helped out, haven't we? Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, and so on. Okay, so we've given, and often when we're analysing a graph, or if you live near where I live, analysing a graph, when you're analysing it, they're going to provide you some kind of shading or designation for different features. If they don't, you can basically make them yourself. If we were analysing this graph, for example, of course, we've been given 3 zones, pre-exercise, exercise, and post-exercise, and we've got kind of little sub-zones in the exercise part, you know, like the oxygen deficit stage, for example. So what are we going to do here? We're going to take each of these stages in turn and we're going to analyze it. We're going to break it down and we're going to explain it. Remember, if we break something down kind of language, we're probably going to be using language like firstly, comma, secondly, because we're doing like little sections, and so on, thirdly, or next, comma. When we explain something, we're using things like because. we're using things like through. So-and-so happens through this process. So-and-so happens by the following happening. We might also say things like this means. We might also say things like therefore, comma. Okay, that's us explaining things. Everything I've included in that, even those scribbled little words, if there's a capital, there's a reason for it. If there's a comma, there's a reason for it, and so should you. Now, let's have a little go at our answer. I've already done the answer in advance, so let's have a little go at it. I think it's this one. Yeah, what a lot of words. Okay, so let's have a go at this. Let me get my red pen ready. So during the rest phase, so look, what am I doing? I'm simply saying during this phase, during the rest phase, comma, heart rate is 55 beats per minute. Look, I'm probably going to get a mark for that in reality. I'm probably going to get a mark for 55 beats per minute there, because I've picked up a specific detail from the graph. Just one second, I just need to reach and grab something. I need to reach and grab two things. So, where was I? Sorry, folks, I meant to have a bit of paper near me, and I didn't, which was annoying. So we've got this sort of notion of 55 beats per minute, and we might even get credit for saying bradycardic. I'm going to give myself just one mark for that. Link them up. Spectacles. Okay, so if it was resting heart rate below 60 beats per minute, because she is a trained aerobic athlete. So I'm giving a reason. I'm giving my because she's a trained athlete. I might get a mark for that. Who knows? I mean, let's see. Secondly, so I'm breaking it down now into the next chunk. Secondly, comma, in the rest phase, comma, notice the use of commas here. Get it right, please. Heart rate increases pre-exercise by the action of adrenaline. Two things there. I say adrenaline acting on the SA node. Look at my explaining language. In this case, my analysing language. I'm saying it happens by this happening. So action of adrenaline on the SA node. This is the anticipatory rise. Okay, possibly another mark. Let's connect those up and let's be harsh on ourselves and not give us an extra one. During the warm-up, comma, again, I'm analysing. It's basically secondly, thirdly, fourthly. During the During the warm-up, heart rate increases rapidly. Okay, so notice the word rapidly or steeply. Okay, I'm probably going to get myself a mark because I'm explaining demand for oxygen increases at the muscle. Okay, there's my connection. Next, comma, so again, I'm into the next phase. You probably already realised that I'm now into the exercise of the swim phase. During the swim and the cycle, heart rate remains relatively stable. Okay, so swim and start heart rate remains relatively stable. This means, there's my language, it's steady state. Boom. Steady state exercise is being achieved and O2 demand is being met by O2 supply. Would I get another mark there? Or possibly it would connect up and make the same mark. During the transitions, by the way, we mean, look, this little area here and this little area here. During the transitions, heart rate falls slightly because demand decreases temporarily. Okay, I've got my because, demand decreases temporarily. Finally, during recovery, heart rate falls. First rapidly, and then gradually. Let's give ourselves one mark for that. The fast and slow component of epoch are in operation. Okay, so we might get a mark in there. We're saying why that's happening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's my max. If it's not a level question, of course, you do need to check that with your specific exam board. And I've got my last point here. Therefore, comma, O2 deficit is rapid and lactic acid removed. Now, before I move on from that answer, I want to tell you that this answer, despite the fact that I think we gave some good quality responses, is flawed. And I'd like you to tell me why it's flawed. Can anyone tell me why that might be? Okay, so have a little think about that. So I meant to ask you at the start why it would flawed, to be honest, but I forgot. So we covered this section, we talked about this, we talked about this, we even talked about these little bits. We talked about those bits, and we talked here. Do you notice that I didn't talk about that section in my answer? And what do we notice about that section? The heart rate gradually goes up, and we can't tell why. You could say, okay, they're sprinting to the end. Okay, they accelerate. It's possible, but what's actually happening there in reality is an experience of cardiovascular drift. Now, I'm not going to go into this in real detail now, but cardiovascular drift is a process where heart rate drifts upwards in longer duration exercise, often after 20 or 30 minutes. And it does that because our production of H2O through the aerobic process It means that we start to lose fluid, we sweat, we begin to dehydrate. And when that happens, that has a negative effect on the plasma, the fluid component of the blood, which makes the blood more viscous. Okay, so basically we lose blood fluidity. It becomes less liquid, if you like, because the gel liquid component plasma reduces as we lose water, and as a result the blood becomes a more solid, robust structure, and therefore our stroke volume decreases. So as a result our stroke volume decreases. And if we go way back up here, in order to maintain this, if stroke volume goes down, what do we have to do? We have to increase heart rate. And that would explain this part of the graph here. Okay, that cardiovascular drift, because our blood becomes more viscous, heart rate has to go up to compensate, and so on and so on. So look, slightly flawed answer because I missed a bit out, but it's a common thing we do in an exam, isn't it? We kind of skip a bit or we miss a detail. And I guess one of the things we'd say there is it's really important to stay calm and make sure, well, firstly, obviously, make sure your knowledge is really great. But secondly, stay calm and take your time in picking up the detail of those questions. Can I come back to the health warning briefly? If your exam board tell you that analysing is giving strengths and weaknesses, I mean, 2 points on that. Point 1, they're completely wrong. But point 2, you have to do that, okay? Because ultimately you have to get marks in your exam. But it's a difficult one because this is what analysing should really mean. And to be fair, many of the exam boards have nailed that down and got that right. But there's a couple still lingering who claim that analysing means evaluating. Evaluating would be giving strengths and weaknesses and making a conclusion. Analysing means breaking something up into parts and explaining it. And hopefully that's helpful. Okay, back to the camera.
Okay, so we got good feed, Marta.
Yes, sorry, I was just messing about with the volume, but I
So,
think
yeah,
it's
so we're okay.
fine now.
Okay, good stuff. Well, folks, I genuinely didn't mean to go that long on that first episode there. Look, it's good for you because you you guys get more stuff for free, basically. So it's good for you, obviously, but I hope I didn't bore you too much, basically. So yeah, so look, I think that's for me, as I said there in the little teaching episode, there's quite comprehensive, that little section. And most importantly, it's actually the case that a lot of that, it can be asked directly, but it underpins all kinds of other knowledge as well. So it's really facilitating of a broader understanding. So yeah, so hopefully that's been useful.
Yes, James,
Marta.
I was just going to say that while you were doing your teaching episode, some of our viewers may have stopped watching us for some reason. It seemed to, some people seem to have experienced a little bit of a blackout. It hasn't been everyone, because we were keeping an eye, and it was fine. So for those who have missed a bit, the recorded version, I'm not sure, because we weren't experiencing it, but we know that some people have.
Okay.
So, of course, the recorded version, the on-demand version, will be available full,
Well,
entirely.
folks, the thing I'd say about that is, as far as I know, that's not something we're in control of. I know that helps you, but look, that's why the recording's there. We are live here, so I guess that can happen sometimes. And I'm pretty confident that the stream's going to be pretty robust, generally speaking. So we've worked really hard on that, so hopefully should be fine. But if you did miss a few seconds or a minute, whatever, obviously make a point of catching that up later on when you've got the recording available. In fact, we have got DVR. You can drag backwards, and I was going to say you can't drag forwards because the future hasn't happened yet, but you can drag backwards within this. So if you need to, go and do that. So hopefully the feed will be there, because the feed did continue, as far as I'm aware. I haven't had any notifications to the contrary. Any questions?
I have a question personally.
Fire away.
You were talking about heart rate and the maximum and all of that. I would like to know, as someone who doesn't know very much about the world of physical education, is there a lower limit to what heart rate can be? I mean, of course, you can
zero,
be dead,
you're dead, isn't it?
Yeah. Other than that, what would a super fit person have as their lower heart rate?
I would say that anything below an averaging of below 60 at rest is already super fit. So what I'm going to say here, I hope no one out there takes as an aspiration, because this would be freakishly unusual, and in many cases where this has been the case in the past, there have been substances at play. So, but there have been reports, especially of endurance cyclists and particularly cross-country skiers, of having a resting heart rate that can be below 30 beats per minute. So your heart beats once every 2 seconds or fewer.
Wow.
Which, trust me, is slow. What that means in essence is your heart is so powerful that it's pushing out so much stroke volume that it only needs to go once every 2 seconds. So Miguel Indurain, who was a compatriot of yours, Marta, is an example back in the 90s, I think. There've been others, but yeah, particularly endurance cyclists and cross-country skiers. Both of those sports have had massive endemic issues with drug use, especially around the use of EPO. So the relationship between those states, it's hard. It's not for me to judge, but just be aware of that as well. So yeah, something like that. But that would be ridiculous at 30. I mean, very, very odd to be that low. Okay.
And one of our viewers is asking, would you have a steeper anticipatory rise?
Well, I say anticipatory.
Anticipatory, right. So would you have a steeper anticipatory rise if you were more nervous?
Yes, you would. So adrenaline can be released in varying quantities and over a sustained or a brief period of time. So obviously if adrenaline is released over a sustained period of time, then obviously that climb is going to get greater and greater and greater. By the way, the release of adrenaline, in this sense, we're kind of looking at as a positive thing. We have this same principle in operation all kinds of different ways. Part of our heart rate control, our intrinsic control, for example, operates in that way. Part of our hormonal control, intrinsic is the temperature, sorry, my mistake. Part of, for example, our studies in sports psychology and stress and the alarm reaction involves a release of adrenaline, which acts on the sinoatrial node, which over long periods of time can lead to conditions of coping and eventually exhaustion. So this is something that you might just want to, again, use more globally. I'm just trying to make some links between content for you. But yeah, nice.
Okay. And I have another
far
one.
away. Yeah.
On the graphical representation of heart rate, you said, can you explain the point you made about everything below the curve is aerobic and above the curve is anaerobic?
Okay, so yeah, good question. So if we had a heart rate graph there, so I should probably rephrase that actually, because in my mind I was thinking about an oxygen consumption curve when I said that. But what I would say is that anything which is below the line on that graph, including the space below the line at rest, for example, are heartbeats which actually happened. So if it's below the curve, it's a heartbeat that actually happened, or a quantity of heartbeats that actually happened. That is directly equivalent to oxygen consumption. The curve would be exactly the same way. So therefore, we can say that if anything below the curve was work that was done aerobically. Now, when we say anything above the curve is done anaerobically, we're not talking about right up above the graph, because that work was never done. We're talking about that little segment which I described as oxygen deficit. That work is work that would have been, or it's heartbeats or oxygen that would have been used if they were available. So because we can't speed our heart up immediately, it has to gradually build, same with our oxygen consumption, through all those mechanisms, redistribution, for example. Because of that, we have a period of time where we don't reach steady state exercise until we've had to undertake a period of anaerobic work. And that's why I'm saying that's above the curve, so is effectively work that's been done anaerobically. Everything below is work that's been done aerobically.
Okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm. You want any more questions, or you want?
Are there any more questions?
There is one more question,
Fire away.
but I don't know. Okay, the last question is, someone is saying, I don't understand cardiovascular drift.
Okay, so we are going to study this in a little bit more detail in one of the future sessions. This is the essence of cardiovascular drift. When we work, or when you broadcast live in a studio, which is at a temperature of about 38 degrees, you sweat a great deal, you lose fluid. Of course, when we work aerobically, one of the products of that aerobic respiration, other than energy, is CO2, and what we're interested in this commentary, H2O, water. So we produce water, and effectively that water is taken from a couple of places, but one of the places that the water is taken from is the plasma, the fluid structure within the blood. So as a result, the blood literally, over a period of time, about half an hour normally with an exercise, some example would say 20 minutes, but that sort of period, that the blood will literally become less liquid and will become more sticky, or viscous is the word we want you to use, and increased viscosity. So if you think about that original equation I put up there, which said that cardiac output equals stroke volume times heart rate, well, of course, if the blood becomes more viscous and sticky, blood pressure goes up, less blood comes back to the heart, and as a result, less stroke volume comes out of the heart. We have to keep cardiac output at the same level to keep going, to keep steady state. So what do we do with heart rate? Stroke volume has to go down, so heart rate has to go up. And that is the drift. It drifts up. It would be that way, wouldn't it? It drifts. I'm getting my left and right confused because I'm looking at myself over there. But it would drift up. It would drift up. And that's the cardiovascular drift as we understand it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right.
Yep.
Happy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where are we? I have no idea on time. We're a bit short on time, I would say that, so we need to finish on time.
Yeah.
So should we dive straight into session 2?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Okay,
good
go
stuff.
Then.
Okay, super fast little mini session needed here after my marathon effort on the last one. Okay, venous return, quick. It is the quantity of blood returning to the heart. So if we note for a moment, I'll just kind of flash it down here. The quantity I should put in there, quantity of blood returning to the heart. So if we consider for a moment that venous return is equal to stroke volume, and stroke volume is the blood leaving the left ventricle and powers all forms of energy production by delivering nutrients and essential products to the muscle cell, venous return becomes an unbelievably important concept for efficient movement in sports and exercise conditions. Because if this goes down, this goes down. If this goes down a lot, this goes down a lot. And this, of course, is what we refer to as Starling, the little bird, Starling's law. Okay, Starling's law said venous return equals stroke volume, and for me, it's just common sense. Right, how much blood leaves the heart? Well, it's got to be roughly the same amount that arrives at the heart. Otherwise, you can have an unbalance and your heart's going to fill up or have nothing in it or whatever. So, as a result, this is actually an intuitive and obvious concept. What we want to know, therefore, is how do we take this concept and during exercise conditions make sure It's as high as possible, and that is what we mean when we refer to venous return mechanisms. And I'm going to go through these super fast. All right, so first one, I'll go through these obvious ones first of all. We've got the notion of gravity. Look, if we are performing something like we're doing a shoulder press and our arms are above our head, gravity is going to drop the blood back down to the heart because it's in what we call the superior area. Okay, superior means above the middle. Okay, in this case, above the heart. So for those parts of our body which are above the heart, gravity will literally bring the blood back to the heart. And don't forget that when we talk about venous return, we are talking about blood which we call venal or venous blood, and it's blood under very low pressure within the venules and veins because it's so distant from the heart by that point. Okay, so especially during those diastolic phases when the heart is in relaxation, the blood in the veins barely moves, if not even falls back, because there's no pressure to propel it. So gravity can help with that if we're talking about something which is superior of the upper body. Now, second point is we can do things such as raise our legs. So, I don't know, I'm going to talk about this in detail in a second. Let's imagine we're, a rugby player, and the game is the World Cup, Men's World Cup final 2013. I think it was, 2003. I think it was it 12 all or 15 all at the end of normal time? So they had to play an extra time period at that point, which England then went on to win through a drop goal and blabbing on. But what you might find is in those breaks between the end of the game, even at half-time or a timeout even, or something like an end of quarter, you might find that players or performers, they lie on their backs and someone kind of wobbles legs for them, which are raised in the air. Why? Because gravity then returns that blood back to the heart. So it's one methodology. What do we notice about this? It is not particularly useful during exercise, unless we are talking about the arms and the head. It's not particularly useful during exercise because, generally speaking, most things that are moving around during exercise are below the heart, so gravity resists that flow. So we have to bear that in mind. Secondly, we have what we call this, I don't know why I'm going this way around, we've got what we call the skeletal muscle pump. And do try and use all three of those terms when you describe this thing, the SMP, the skeletal muscle pump. So, because of course, if it was the cardiac muscle pump, it would be the heart, wouldn't it? Or the smooth muscle pump is actually down here, which I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes' time. So how does this work? Well, let me do it in blue. I'll draw it over here. Let's take a vein. Okay, this is a vein which is coming, blood's going in that direction. Okay, blood's going in that direction. And in this vein, we know, as I'll say in a second, we've got our valves, more of which in a second. So blood is being pushed up in this direction. Now, that can happen, but what the skeletal muscle pump does is we've developed a physiology, we've evolved a physiology where these veins are surrounded by skeletal muscle. Now, please don't judge me on the proportions of these things. It's unbelievably incorrect. But what have we got here? We've got a vein which is passing up between muscle fibers, okay, between muscle fibers. So let's assume that this is in our gastrocnemius, for argument's sake, this muscle gastrocnemius. Let's assume this is in our gastrocnemius. Of course, as we're stepping and we're pressing and we're standing and we're jumping and we're running and we're doing whatever we're doing, these muscles are contracting. Okay, so the muscles are contracting. And as they contract, what happens? Woof, woof. It pushes that blood further up. Remember, the blood cannot go back. Why? Because we've got these valves to prevent it going back. So there's only one way that blood can go, and it's up. Okay, and that's what we call the skeletal muscle pump. So during exercise, this one is ding, ding, ding. It's a great one because we're moving, the muscles are contracting and forcing that blood back to the heart. What happens when we stop at the end of our 70, 90, 80 minutes, whatever, the end of our tennis match, whatever? Well, of course, we can do an active cool down. Of course, we can jog on the spot. Of course, we can jog back into position. Of course, we can sort of stand and press on our toes to keep that skeletal muscle pump going. It's something you can probably all do in your downtime in your performances to improve your performances. Next one, over here. We'll come back to smooth muscle. Respiratory pump. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to be quick on this one. It's all about the thoracic cavity. As I start to exercise, as you start to exercise, what happens in our thoracic cavity, our chest? So, as the blood actually comes back towards the chest area, that last most low pressure part of the venal system, the vein, literally the vena cava coming back into the thoracic cavity, the chest is pumping. And it pushes that blood back into the heart again, only in one direction. Why? Because the valves prevent it going in the other way, more of which in a second. Respiratory muscle pump during exercise, ding, ding, ding. Yes, this is another reason why we do an active cool down. Smooth muscle. Okay, let's remind ourselves, if we look at a vein a second, we're going to have an inner lining. Okay, I'm not going to get into the cell structure of this for today. If you're interested in that, we have stuff on that already, or we have it on the EverLearn if you want to go further. Here we have our lumen. Okay, so that area there is our lumen, or our space, and of course surrounding this, don't judge me on colour, surrounding this is a wall of smooth muscle. Just be aware that little white line is simply just like a measuring line. It's not actually there, okay? Just I don't know if that's going to confuse you. But we have this smooth muscle which surrounds the vein. And then finally, we have what I'm only going to call today an outer layer. It obviously is much prettier and smooth. Oh, what am I doing? Much smoother than that. But the point I want to make about this smooth muscle, this purple layer in here, is as blood is passing through the vein. Remember, this is a vein here. As it's passing through the vein, okay, as it's passing through the vein, this smooth muscle is going to pulse. It's going to constrict at times, and it's going to dilate at times. Okay, so we're going to have a situation here where imagine that smooth muscle is literally pulsing, and that smooth muscle, which is operated autonomically, is experiencing changes in what we call the vasomotor tone. Tone as in muscle tone, how contracted it is. So that vasomotor tone goes up and down in a pulse. And of course, what happens then, it's like squeezing a bag. It's like... Wasn't expecting to produce that noise in my life, but there you go. It's a pulsing action up that way. And then the pocket valves, of course, they prevent backflow. Now, note that valves are only present in venules and veins. They're not present in capillaries, arterioles, and arteries. They're only present in veins. Why? Because of the low pressure, especially during the diastolic phase within the venal system, within the venous, the veins, effectively. Okay, so that low pressure, and we've seen already what those valves do. They prevent the blood going backwards. Now, does this change during exercise? No. Does this change during exercise? Yes. Does this change during exercise, smooth muscle? Yes, because it becomes more kind of pulsing. Does gravity change during exercise? No, unless we manipulate the skeletal muscle pump. Change during exercise? Yes. So, I'm not totally sure what's beeping here on my machine. I apologise, folks. So, we've got some practice questions in. I've already put the answer in here because we've got to go fast. Netball matches last for 60 minutes but involve numerous passes and breaks in play. Skill. Explain how. Explain how. We're going to tend to find the language we're going to use is going to be things like through, by, this means, because. Okay, this is there are others, by the way, but I'm just going fast. This is the kind of language we'd expect to see in our answer. So let's have a look. How many marks am I after? I'm after 6. During active periods, good grammar, venous return is high through the skeletal muscle pump and the respiratory pump. Let's give ourselves a mark. Okay, so we're giving it these, which are both elevated during exercise. So they both elevate during exercise. It's not just this thing exists, but it increases during exercise. Furthermore, good grammar, smooth muscles squeeze veins because the blood is under lower pressure. So we've got smooth muscles squeezing during exercise. Remember, we've got to talk about all periods here. To begin with, I'm talking about the active period. They squeeze veins because the blood is under low pressure. Let's just link that up there. It's an extra bit of detail. And pocket valves must prevent backflow by operating in the diastolic phase. Let's link those things up. Mark. During breaks, I'm now on the other part of the game. During breaks, Julie should jog on the spot. Okay, why? So that's going to get us a mark. Why is she jogging on the spot? Or stretch because she can maintain SMP, skeletal muscle pump. Now, I wouldn't recommend you write SMP. I was running out of space. But maintain skeletal muscle pump. Finally, Julie could use gravity by laying down and raising her legs in the way I mentioned before during breaks to maximize her venous return via gravity. So there we get our max. Look what we've done. We haven't just named stuff. We've explained how it happens. Okay, and notice, if I'm going to find them on that, by I'm struggling to find them here now. Through, notice this language, especially through and by, we're using when we're explaining how something happens. Now, next question. Let me ping this in for you. In fact, let's look at the question first of all. Julie always completes an active cool-down, good for you, Julie, after training and competition, with specific reference to venous return and vascular shunt, which, excuse me, we haven't talked about here, but we could. Explain why. Explain why are particularly going to be because. Therefore, comma. This means... If you want to get better at this, you have to look at our roadmap stuff, okay? Explain why this is so important. Let's have a look at the... Oops, pressed the wrong one. This is because a cool-down maintains an elevated venous return through... So we've got elevated venous return through skeletal muscle and respiratory pumps. Nice. Okay, probably going to get 2 marks there. This means, there's my language, that stroke volume remains high by Starling's law. So stroke volume remains high, Starling's law. And the muscle can be flushed with oxygenated blood. So we're talking about the muscle remaining flushed as a result. Now, I may have a submax here because I'm talking perhaps getting too many marks for venous return, not enough for vascular shunt, but let's just keep going. The cool down ensures that cardiac output is still directed to the muscle by vasodilating arterioles and precapillary sphincters leading to the muscle. Okay, so that's going to get us a mark in there. I think we're on max already. Arterioles and precapillary sphincters, sorry for the shorthand, to other organs remain vasoconstricted. Okay, so what have I done there? I've explained how I'm clearly saying, I'm explaining why I'm clearly saying because this means, therefore, comma, and so on and so on. I'm clearly doing that skill, and I've managed to get my language into my answer. Folks, I really feel like I've rushed you there. I hope that's been useful. You're probably going to need to watch that back because it took way too long in that first session. Sometimes this happens when things are live, and it's hard to get it exactly. We intend to do 2 sort of 16 to 17 minute sections of the teaching, and I basically went over 20 minutes on that first one, so I apologise. It's my mistake, and I hope that hasn't been too desperately fast paced for you at the end. Anyway, hopefully it's useful.
Okay, so that's a big session. That's a really big session. So look, folks, I've been abandoned here in the studio. Marta has left me and she's gone. So I'm here all on my own. So we're gonna wrap the session up pretty quickly. I hope that's been useful for you. In my opinion, again, I'll repeat what I said before. There's some really facilitating. There's some core knowledge there. There's some really facilitating knowledge there. I would encourage you to think closely about the command words that we've looked at there. You have to check that against your exam board. Unfortunately, there is a tendency for exam boards to get confused about what they mean by certain commands. So things like analyze from earlier, for example, check it. You have to check what they specifically look for. And as I said before, we are absolutely robustly confident of our definition of analyze. It's absolutely accurate. However, lots of exam boards just interchange it with things like evaluate. So you need to just check that against your particular exam board. So A couple of things before we finish off and before all of us can go and get in the garden and put our feet up, whatever. We have no transmissions tomorrow. On Friday, we have Fridays off, so do you. And we're back on Monday. I want to remind myself on Monday, if I strain my eyes, we have GCSE PE. On Monday, then we have 3 A-level sessions, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, all of which are on at 4 o'clock. So we're looking at some respiratory stuff, we're looking at energy, we're looking at recovery, and the following week we go into some stuff on social culture. We're going to go initially into ethics and deviance, so we're going to shift into that area. We also have the GCSE Spanish revision next Tuesday and Thursday. If you are a colleague in a school out there, please make a point of sharing that with your Spanish teachers. We're putting those sessions on. People need to attend. Finally, do make a point of subscribing to the YouTube channel. It genuinely is important. Thank you very much for doing that if you already have or if you're about to. We genuinely appreciate it. It makes a significant difference to us, and I'm going to wish you on that basis, as I select what I'm going to push to live, I wish you all a really, really great evening. Enjoy the summer, enjoy the warm weather, and I wish you the very, very best. Take care.
The traditional classroom environment doesn't suit everyone. Students that don't fit this pace of learning begin to lose confidence. The problem is, the current learning model has holes in it. Luckily, the EverLearner.com is here to fill those holes. With the EverLearner Classroom, each student is given a chance to master each subject at their own pace. With thousands of video tutorials and tens of thousands of automated questions on the site, students can progress at their own individual pace. And because every interaction is tracked within the site, teachers can review students' progress and gain access to razor-sharp data. Teachers will have more time to engage with small groups and be better informed of where their time and support is needed. With the EverLearner, teachers can leave the traditional model behind and become facilitators, coaches, and inspirers. There's a reason we have over 100,000 registered students. To learn more, visit our website today.
Takes two.